Do I have my phone so I can figure out what time it is? Oh, I didn't put the Osage Shalom out. Oops.
I found
The Hirsch.
Freedman, but I didn't find the. There it is. I'm just into that one. Sorry. That's okay.
I'm glad that you went through it.
Well, I like to do that. Makes me feel like I know what
Okay.
I'm doing, kind of, sort of. Finally, after all these years.
We tried.
Are we using the union?
No, we're using,
You must, I think this may have been in the bench.
that was loud, I know.
Do you want to just keep it in the bench?
Yeah, you could just keep it. Who's your, the C, the middle C on this piano is clunky.
Got a couple in our church. Just when he comes to tune, you'll need to regulate that a little
Okay.
bit. Something's got a little off. The heat
Right, I
and
know
the
when it's,
cold.
yeah,
in
90
here.
and
Can
12.
you imagine what this baby went through those cold days? Yeah, it does things to them,
Okay, let me just get my phone.
Okay. Feels like there's more out there.
Shabbat Shalom, everyone. If you are in the foyer, please make your way into the sanctuary so we could start services. Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Tonight, we are celebrating and remembering Holocaust Memorial Shabbat, International Holocaust Remembrance Day. On this day in 1945, Auschwitz-Birkenau, the largest Nazi concentration and death camp, was liberated by the Red Army. This day was designated by the United Nations as the International Memorial Day of the Holocaust. Tonight's Shabbat service will be dedicated to the remembrance of 6 million Jewish men, women, and children who were murdered at the hands of the Nazis and their collaborators. During this service, we want to link our hearts across the years to the people who lived and struggled during the Holocaust. Even though they lived during the darkest of times, many kept their Jewish traditions, their faith in God, and their Jewish pride. Despite the horrors they faced, many Jews kept their dignity intact by fighting courageously for a better world in which the Jewish people could be more secure. As we progress through our Shabbat service, you will hear some of their stories. We will sing the songs they sang and recite the prayers they prayed. In doing so, we will connect and we will remember. I want to thank my colleague, Rabbi Beth Schwartz, for putting together this service and allowing me to share it with you this evening. We will now light 6 candles to represent the 6 million Jews who were murdered. Each candle represents 6 groups of people who keep Judaism alive today. Rabbis are the spiritual leaders of the Jewish people. They safeguard the Torah's teachings and preside over Jewish congregations. Jewish educators devote their time and love to educate and create Jewish identities for the next generation. Board members and other temple officials dedicate their time and effort to guarantee their congregations stay functional, organized, and alive. The Jewish Aid Society members and other community organizations like the Federation nourish and maintain the Jewish spirit. Parents and grandparents care about Jewish education. They send their children to Sunday school and reinforce Jewish traditions at home. Young people make the commitment to live as Jews and to carry Judaism into the future. Before lighting our Shabbat candles, we share the story about the women held captive in Auschwitz as told by Naomi, a camp survivor. During those days of horror, we tried to create, at least for a few moments, a festive atmosphere, an atmosphere of Shabbat holiness through prayer and kindling candles. We received candles from our Canadian girlfriends who wrapped packages, and we lit them with tears streaming from our eyes. During all our tribulations, we tried to observe the teaching of lighting Sabbath and holiday candles. Sometimes a hollowed-out potato filled with margarine and a rag wick inside of it would serve as our Sabbath candle in the darkness. When it was impossible to obtain candles, we would light candles symbolically. In November of 1944, we had to go in our usual squads of 5 to work on the 12-hour night shift. We walked bitterly in our tattered clothing through kilometers of mud and filth. Suddenly, the woman next to me began to speak. I just lit the Sabbath candles. I saw 2 electric bulbs and said the blessing on them. We turned to page 2 for our Shabbat candle blessing. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav, v'tzivanu le'avekner shel Shabbat. As the Nazis rose to power, the lives of Jews were thrown into disarray and a shadow was cast over Shabbat. Miriam was 8 years old when the Germans invaded Poland. This is how she described the first day of the war, during which her family persisted with their Shabbat rituals. Dark clouds covered the sky, thunder, lightning, and rain. The faces of my mother and father were even grayer than the clouds. War, said my parents. They were very concerned, trying to understand if the thunder they heard was the roar of cannons. In the evening, the Shabbat table was covered with a festive white tablecloth, and the silver candlesticks glistened as always, but this time, the candle lighting was completely different. Grandmother and mother blessed the candles, but the blessing was accompanied by bitter weeping and took a very long time. We continue with our candle blessing over the wine on pages 4 and 5. ויחולו השמיים והארץ וכל צבאם, ויחל אלוהים ביום השביעי מלאכתו אשר עשתה, וישבות ביום השביעי מכל מלאכתו אשר עשה. ויברך אלוהים את יום השביעי, ויקדש אותו, כי בו שבת מכל מלאכתו, אשר ברא אלוהים לעשות. ברוך אתה אדוני, אלוהינו מלך העולם, בורא פרי הגפן. ברוך אתה אדוני, אלוהינו מלך העולם, אשר קידשנו במצוותיו ורצה בנו. בשבת קודשו באהבה וברצון הנחילנו, זיכרון למעשה בראשית, כי הוא יום תחילה במקרא קודש, זכר ליציאת מצרים. כי בנו בחרת ואותנו קידשת מכל העמים, בשבת קודשך באהבה ורצון הנחלתנו. ברוך אתה אדוני מקדש השבת. לחיים. Shalom Aleichem speaks to a belief in God's angels that will keep us safe. In the early days of the war, Simcha's family was faced with the dilemma of whether to flee from the invading Nazis on Shabbat. We will not travel on Shabbat, Father decided. If Hashem wishes to, he will rescue us without desecrating Shabbat. We therefore observe Shabbat with the intention to join those fleeing from the city after Shabbat. 3 stars announced the end of Shabbat. We realized that we had to hurry and leave the city. But where would we find a wagon and driver who would agree to drive us? After numerous efforts, we turned back from whence we came. Hundreds of other people turned back as well. We turn now to page 24 for Shalom Aleichem. Shalom Aleichem, Malachei Asharet, Malachei Elyon, Mi-Melech, Malachei Amachim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Bachem Shalom, Malachei Shalom, Malachei Elyon, Mi-Melech, Malachei Amachim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Baruchuni leShalom, Malachei Shalom, Malachei Elyon, Mi-Melech, Malachei HaMelachim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Seichem leShalom, Malachei Shalom, Malachei Elyon, Mi-Melech, Malachei HaMelachim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We now rise for the Baruch Hu on page 146 in our prayer book. Lai, la, lai, 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 lai. Lai, la, lai, 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 lai. Lai, 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 lai. Lai, la, lai, And once there was a garden, and a child and a tree. And once there was a father, and a mother and a dog. And once there was a house, and a sister, and a grandma. And once there was a life. We continue in the English of Ma'ariv Aravim on the bottom of page 147. Together, Adonai, your majesty is proclaimed by the marvels of earth and sky. Sun, moon, and stars testify to your power and wisdom. Day follows day in endless succession, and the years vanish, but your sovereignty endures. Though all things pass, let not your glory depart from us. Help us to become co-workers with you and endow our fleeting days with abiding worth. Baruch atah Adonai, Hama'ariv Aravim. In a dark cellar in Cologne, Germany, where thousands of Jews once hid from Nazi torment, an inscription was scrawled across a stone wall by an anonymous author. The words declare a faith in God despite the ungodliness that surrounded them. I believe in the sun even when it is not shining. I believe in love even when I don't feel it. I believe in God even when He is silent. We continue with Ahavat Olam on page 148. Ahavat Olam, Beit Yisrael, Amachavta, Torah mitzvot, ukim u'mishpatim, otanu lemadeta. Al ken Adonai Eloheinu, b'shopenu v'kulmenu, nasiach b'chukecha, v'nismach b'divrei Toratecha, u'v'mitzvotecha, l'olam va'ed. Ki chem chayenu ve'orech yameinu, ve'orech yameinu, u'vahem negi yomam v'layla, yomam v'layla. Le'avatecha tasim imenu le'olamim, Baruch atah Adonai, Ohev Amo Yisrael. The Shema is found on page 149. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Baruch Shem Kevod Malchuto L'olam va'ed. You may be seated. The Ve'ahavta teaches us to love God with all our heart, might, and soul. It commands us to teach the Torah's words constantly and repeatedly to our children. In the Nazi-occupied lands of Eastern Europe, schools were outlawed and Jewish learning, specifically that of children, was forbidden under a penalty of death. Such decrees did not halt the establishment of a network of elementary and secondary schools and even higher education institutions within the ghettos of Vilna, Lodz, and Warsaw. For many students, school was a ray of light amid the darkness, an anchor and symbol in the continuation of normal life. For David, this outlet contributed greatly to his survival. It was learning that made my life as a child bearable, insulated me from what was happening in the ghetto, and it was learning that allowed me to resume my life after the Holocaust. Learning became a form of spiritual survival and even resistance. In many ghettos, concealed shootings sometimes took the form of play to hide their Jewish education. The Youth Care Organization formed several play groups, which replaced the formal school structure. Lessons had to be camouflaged as games. In the guise of play, genuine school subjects such as history, math, and geography were taught. Children took turns in alerting their classmates and teachers of the approach of the SS. On a moment's notice, children and teachers transformed the classroom into a play scene. Even the smallest details of these activities had to be well rehearsed, for if anyone were caught, it could mean death for children and teachers alike. We continue now with the Wehrhafte in English on the bottom of page 150. You shall love Adonai your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might. Take to heart these instructions with which I charge you this day. Impress them upon your children. Recite them when you stay at home and when you are away, when you lie down and when you get up. Bind them as a sign on your hand and let them serve as a symbol on your forehead. Inscribe them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates. Thus you shall remember to observe all my commandments and to be holy to your God. I am Adonai your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt to be your God. I am Adonai your God. Adonai Elohechem Emet. Avraham, a young man who suffered in the Lodz ghetto, found his own way of escaping the harsh reality imposed by the Nazis. Through poetry, he was able to dream of escaping. One of his poems describes a freedom that he never attained. When I grow up and reach the age of 20, I'll set out to see an enchanting world. I'll take a seat in a bird with a motor. I'll rise and soar high into space. I'll fly, sail, hover over the lonely, faraway world. I'll soar over rivers and oceans. Skyward shall I ascend and blossom. A cloud, my sister, the wind, my brother. Michamocha praises God as the maker of miracles, for God was the one who parted the sea and delivered the Israelites to freedom. Page 152. Michamocha bailim Adonai, Michamocha nedar b'kodesh, norat tehilot osef eleh, norat tehilot osef eleh, malchutecha ra'u banecha, bokei hayam lifnei Moshe, u'miriam zivim anu ve'ameru, Adonai yemoch l'olam va'ed, Adonai yemoch l'olam va'ed, Adonai yemoch l'olam va'ed. ונאמר כי בנה אדוני את יעקב, וגאלו מיד חזק ממנו, ברוך אתה אדוני, גאל ישראל. The Shamru talks about keeping Shabbat throughout the ages as a covenant for all times. Rabbis during the Holocaust struggled to maintain the Jewish traditions, but did so on Shabbat and other holidays in order to strengthen the spirits of their people, even in the harshest conditions. In Bergen-Belsen, Rabbi Israel Shapiro organized the Hanukkah celebration in 1943, determined to draw spiritual strength from the story of the Maccabees. From their meager food portions, the men saved up some bits of fat. The women pulled threads from their tattered garments and twisted them into makeshift wicks. A candle holder was fashioned out of a raw potato. Even dreidels for the children in the camp were carved out of the wooden shoes that inmates wore. At great risk to their lives, many of the inmates made their way unnoticed to Barrack 10, where the rabbi was to conduct the Hanukkah ceremony. He inserted the improvised candles into the makeshift menorah, and in a soft voice began to chant 3 blessings. On the 3rd blessing, in which God is thanked for having kept us alive, the rabbi's voice broke into sobs, for he had lost his whole family. And the rabbi said, by kindling this Hanukkah candle, we are symbolically identifying ourselves with the Jewish people everywhere. Our long history records many horrors our people have endured and survived. We may be certain that no matter what may befall us as individuals, the Jews as a people will survive. Page 154. V'shamru v'nei Yisrael et HaShabbat, et HaShabbat, לעשות et HaShabbat לדורותם ברית עולם, ברית עולם. בני ובן בני ישראל, אותי לעולם. בני ובן בני ישראל, אותי לעולם. ששת ימים עשה אדוני, עשה אדוני את השמיים ואת הארץ. וביום השביעי שבת, שבת ויהי נפש. We continue in our service with Tefillah on page 155 as we rise. Adonai sefatai tiftach ufi yagid tehilatecha. Adonai, open up my lips that my mouth may declare your praise. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu v'Elohei Avotenu v'Imotenu, Elohei Avraham, Elohei Yitzchak, Elohei Yaakov, Elohei Sarah, Elohei Rivka, Elohei Rachel, Elohei Leah, Ha'el Hagadol, Hagibor ve'Hanora, El Elyon, Gomel Chasadim Tovim, Bekonei Hakol, Bezocher Chasevot ve'Imahot, Umevigula lifnei v'neihem, Leman Shemo be'ahava, Melech Ozer u'Moshiach u'Magen, Baruch atah Adonai, Magen Avraham ve'Yisrael Sarah. Atah gibor l'olam Adonai, Mechayei hakol atah Rav lehoshia. Mashiv haruach u'orid hagashem, Mechakel chayim v'chesed, Mechayei hakol berachamim rabim, Zomech noflim v'rofei cholbim, U'matir asurim, U'mekayim emunato lishenei afar, Michamocha b'gevorot, U'bito melech, Melech mimit u'mechayei, U'matzmiach Yeshua, Baruch atah Adonai, mechayei hakol. Atah kadosh v'shimcha kadosh, u'kodshim b'chol yom yehallelujah selah. Baruch atah Adonai, el kadosh. You may be seated. During the Holocaust, the spiritual strength of the Jewish people showed in their resistance to the Nazi oppression. Armed resistance in the ghettos was a last stand endangering the lives of all who were living in the ghetto and resulting in its liquidation, the deportation of all its inhabitants. This kind of resistance could only be undertaken when one was certain that the alternative was death. In April of 1943, news arrived that the Germans had stationed an army in Warsaw, and it seemed that the ghetto would soon be liquidated. As a member of the Jewish fighting organization in the Warsaw Ghetto, Tuvia wrote, "No one slept that night. Everybody spent the time packing the most necessary articles, linen, bedding, food, and taking it down to the bunkers." We read together on page 161. Be gracious, Adonai, our God, to your people Israel, and receive our prayers with love. Oh, may our worship always be acceptable to you. Fill us with the knowledge that you are near to all who seek you in truth. The prayers of the Jews were answered when the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising began. The invading German forces were surprised by the ferocity of the resistance of the armed groups and by the perseverance of the ghetto inhabitants. Most of their Jewish fighters did not view their actions as an effective measure by which to save themselves, but rather as a battle for the honor of the Jewish people and as a protest to the world's silence. Mordechai Anlowitz was the leader of the Jewish fighting organization which led the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. He wrote, "What happened exceeded our boldest dreams. The Germans fled twice from the ghetto. One of our companies held its position for 40 minutes, while the other one lasted upwards of 6 hours. I cannot describe to you the conditions in which the Jews are living. Only a handful will survive. All the rest will succumb sooner or later. Their fate has been sealed. In almost all of the bunkers in which our friends are hiding, one cannot even light a candle at night for lack of air. Goodbye, my friend. Perhaps we will see each other again. The main thing is this. My life's dream is to become a reality. I have seen the Jewish defense of the ghetto in all of its strength and glory." We turn to page 163 as we read responsively. For the good in us which calls us to a better life, we give thanks. For the strength to improve the world with our hearts and our hands, we offer praise. For the desire in us which leads us to work for peace, we are grateful. For life and nature, harmony and beauty, for the hope of tomorrow, all praise to the source of being. For all these things, O Sovereign, let your name be forever praised and blessed. O God, our Redeemer and Helper, let all who live affirm you and praise your name in truth. Blessed are you, Adonai, your name is goodness, and you are worthy of thanksgiving. Baruch atah Adonai, hatov shimcha u'lechana'eh lechodot. Inspired by the heroic actions during the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, Vilna poet Hirsch Glick wrote the following song that became the official anthem of Jewish resistant fighters throughout Europe, Zog nit keinmal, the partisan song. Sag nicht keinmal, du gehst den letzten Weg, den Himmeln bleibe verstehen bleibe Tag, weil kommen wird noch uns der ausgeweckte Show. Es wird der Port und uns der droht mir seinen Do, weil kommen wird noch uns der ausgeweckte Show. Wird der Port und uns der droht mir seinen Do. Von grünen Palmen lande wenn mannen Play. Wir weinen do bei uns der Beid mit uns der Weh. Und wo gefallen sie, zerspritzt von uns der Blut. Wird das Spross von uns gewöhne uns der Mut. Und wo gefallen sie, zerspritzt von uns der Blut. Wird das Spross von uns gewöhne uns der Mut. We read together our prayer for peace on page 164. Grant us peace, your most precious gift, O eternal source of peace, and give us the will to proclaim its message to all the peoples of the earth. Bless our country as a safeguard of peace, its advocate among the nations. May contentment reign within our borders, health and happiness within our homes. Strengthen the bonds of friendship and fellowship among all the inhabitants of our world. Plant virtue in every soul, and may the love of your name hallow every home and every heart. We turn to page 253. At this time, we think of those in our community who are ill, all who we wish a sense of God's comforting presence in their lives this Shabbat. We pray that they will have a complete and speedy healing of body and of soul, and a return to health and strength. This evening, we are praying for the healing of Phyllis Barenhouse, Mary Beth Kaplan, Richard Kaplan, Marjorie Gilberg, Susan Israel, Karen Klein, Jamie Mykoff, John Tejada, and Michelle Walder. If there is any name that you would like to add to our prayer for healing, you may say it out loud or in your hearts at this time. We join together on page 253 with our prayer for healing, Misha Berach. Misha Berach, Avotinu, Mekor Abracha, Leimotenu. May the source of strength, who bless the ones before us, help us find the courage to make our lives a blessing, and let us say, Amen. Misha Berach, Imotenu, Mekor Abracha, Lavotenu. Bless those in need of healing with refuah shalema, the renewal of body, the renewal of spirit, and let us say, Amen. We pause now for a moment of silent prayer and reflection. Oh, say shalom bimromav. Uyase shalom aleinu. Ve'al kol Yisrael. Ve'imru. V'imru amin. Yase shalom. Yase shalom. Shalom aleinu. Ve'al kol Yisrael. Yase shalom. Yase shalom. Shalom aleinu. Ve'al kol Yisrael. Tonight, January 27th, congregations and communities around the world mark International Day of Commemoration in memory of the victims of the Holocaust. This day was designed by way of a UN General Resolution adopted on November 1st, 2005. The date designated for this Holocaust Remembrance Day is no coincidence. On January 27th, 1945, Soviet troops liberated the biggest Nazi concentration camp, Auschwitz-Birkenau, in then-occupied Poland. Tonight, I wanted to share a story of liberation. The date of May 5th, 1945 will be forever inscribed in my memory. Ruth Fenton. It is the day of my liberation from the depths of purgatory. I had been in the Auschwitz concentration camp when a group of 500 women, me among them, were put into locked cattle cars one dreary, dismal day in the latter part of October 1944. We traveled for 4 days and nights until we arrived in Lenzing, Austria, at a branch of the notorious Mauthausen concentration camp. Though still in shock and despair, we were amazed to see the beauty of the snow-capped mountains of the Alps and the lovely wood-carved cottages. I had just been released from the hospital where I was in quarantine for infectious diseases due to scarlet fever. This left me very frail and weak. Because of this, I stayed in the camp a few days longer. As soon as I was deemed able, I was assigned to a command digging ditches in a labor camp where 100,000 people from all over Europe, including prisoners of war, were forced laborers in the factories of Lenzing for the German Wehrmacht. Winter in Austria was extremely harsh. The ground was frozen solid. We worked in rain and snow after marching in ice and snow, sometimes even barefoot, accompanied by SS men and women and their vicious attack dogs. We returned to the camp where a watery soup was the only food awaiting us. Our clothes and shoes were always wet, and we had to wear the same garments the next day, even though they were still drenched. The days and weeks passed in continuous anguish, hopelessness, and tremendous feelings of despondency. Then rumors came of the Allied bombardment of some Austrian cities. Spring arrived, but our lives remained shattered without hope or change, only uncertainty. The hunger was unbearable. Often we made do eating leftover potato peelings and coffee grounds. Then one morning in early May 1945, we awakened and were astonished to find that the SS guards had disappeared during the night. They were replaced by Hungarian iron guards who had been attached to the SS. For 3 days we had no food. Rumors flew that the guards were planning to poison our water, but they did not have time to commit this treacherous act. In the afternoon of May 5th, 1945, the first tank with an American soldier broke through the gates of hell. This American GI came into our camp. I will never forget him and the look in his eyes. He was about 6'3" with blonde, bushy eyebrows. When he saw us, he immediately crossed himself, tears streaming down his cheeks. What a sight we were. Our heads had been shaven, our eyes sunk in caverns, and our filthy striped uniforms hung on our skin and bones. We immediately ran to his tank, and he brought us his own food rations, and the soldiers who followed him did the same. We could not be jubilant. We were still in shock, too numb in our hearts with pain and sorrow to feel any emotion, but especially that of joy. We did not know whether any members of our families had survived this Holocaust. Unfortunately, it was rare to find any relative who did manage to live through this. I will always remember Mr. Hev, an American official who took me with a delegation to Avansi, a branch of the concentration camp Mauthausen with 30,000 inmates. There we saw mountains of bodies and human forms reduced to waking skeletons. And at this camp, a few of us found some of our relatives. The American Red Cross did a marvelous job of resettling us into a former Hitler-Jugend resort. They set up a field hospital and a kitchen and slowly nurtured us back to life. As we drove in open trucks through the streets of Lenzing, Austria with the American GIs, we proudly held the American flag, realizing that we were free at last. And for all of the stories that we hear of sadness, of death, we have to think what an amazing feeling it was to see those tanks liberating the camps. And throughout the most horrific ordeal that anyone could possibly ever imagine, that the Jews kept their faith, kept their belief in God, that God was going to save the Jewish people. We have a few announcements for activities and events happening at the temple in the next few weeks. Tomorrow there is a sisterhood yoga class from 10 to 12, and I will be doing a teaching on Eloheinu Shema, the prayer for our soul. We will be having religious school at 9:30 this Sunday morning. On Wednesday, February 1st, there will be a board meeting at 6 p.m. On Friday, February 3rd, we will be having Shabbat services again here in the sanctuary with an oneg. And on Sunday, we have two events. February 5th, the religious school in Kehila High will be meeting at 9:30 to celebrate our Tu B'Shvat Seder. And later that evening at 6 p.m., our congregation will gather for our annual meeting and for our own Tu B'Shvat Seder. So I hope that everyone is able to join us at the upcoming events. And for an event that's happening in March, I was just chosen to present at Limud, which is a learning weekend in New Orleans from March 16th through the 18th. And our congregation is invited to head down to New Orleans to come have a weekend of learning with all kinds of scholars from all over the country and some of our own rabbis and scholars from Louisiana. And there will be more information about that in the coming weeks. And I hope that everyone is able to join us either in person, and I believe that programs will also be offered online. So stay tuned in your bulletin for that. We now continue in our service with Aleinu on page 282. Please rise. Aleinu l'shaveach l'adon hakol l'tikdula le'otzeh b'reshit shelo asanu kegoyei haratzot ve'lo samanu kemishpachot ha'adama shelo sam chelkeinu kahem ve'gor aleinu ואנחנו קוראים ומשתחווים ומודים לפני מלך מלכי המלכים הקדוש ברוך הוא ונאמר והיה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ ביום ההוא יהי אדוני אחד ושמו אחד. We think of our loved ones whom death has recently taken from us, those who died at this season in years past, and those whom we have drawn into our hearts with our own. We remember the righteous of all nations, and as we stand as a community, we honor all of those who perished, who have no one left to remember them. This week, we remember the yahrzeit of Conrad Weil, Abe Levine, Helen Sefton Weil, Ralph Lewis Marks, Joan Pincus Mykoff, Max Stamf, Morris Weiss, Max K. Meyer Jr., Marion Dabob Jacobson, Delphine Aaron Hirsch, Harris Simon, Julius Levin, Jerome B. Horn, Ernest Weil, Dr. Charles A. Gottschall, Isidore H. Bruckner, Delphine Weil, and Mary Elaine Sims. The Mourner's Cottage can be found on page 294. Yitgadal v'yitkadash shemei rabbah, ve'alma divarach hirutei v'yamlich malchutei, v'chayachon v'yomechon v'chayei d'chol beit Yisrael, v'agala v'yizman kariv v'imru amen. Yehei shemei rabbah mevarach la'olam u'lamei almaya, yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitramam v'yitnaseh, v'yitadar v'yitaleh v'yitalal shemei d'kudsha b'richu. Le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata, tushbechata v'nechemata, da'amiran be'alma v'imru, amen. Yehei shlama rabba min shemaya v'chayim, aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru, amen. Oseh shalom b'mromav, huya aseh shalom, aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru, amen. May the one who creates harmony on high bring peace to us and to all Israel, and let us say, amen. We now conclude our service with Motzi. Hamotzi lechem min haaretz, we give thanks to God for bread. Our voices rise in song together as our joyful prayer is said. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, hamotzi lechem min haaretz, v'tei avon. Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Please join us in the garden room for Oneg. Shabbat Shalom to everyone joining us streaming tonight. And I look forward to seeing you in person or for you to see me and the rest of our congregation next week. Shabbat Shalom.